So the goal here is going to be to create the pause menu inside of our game when we need it without actually hard storing it inside of the scene hierarchy. So it'll always be in our prefabs and we just load it when we need it. So to do that, we'll need some kind of scene manager script. So in my scripts folder here, I'm gonna create a new C# script. And I will call this game scene manager to differentiate it from the default scene manager in Unity. There is a scene manager which is for switching between scenes, but this is more about controlling the behaviors inside of the scenes, like being able to open the menu. You can call it whatever you want, and you can define extra functionality that it can do in the future, of course. So I'm going to open this up for editing inside of Visual Studio Code. You can use whichever editor you want. So inside of the game scene manager script, I will leave it a MonoBehaviour as well. So for the sake of this video and keeping to core Unity classes, I'm going to leave it as a MonoBehaviour. If you look into singleton design, something like this might make more sense as a singleton, which always exists inside of the scene and will be created on demand if it does not already exist. But for right now, what we need to get reference to is going to be a prefab. So I'm going to call this game object pause menu prefab, and we'll define this inside of the hierarchy. We just have to have a space here for the prefab. And what we will do here is create a method, and we'll call this public void open pause menu. So the idea here is that our prefab does not exist inside the scene, or we don't expect it to be at least. So what we're going to want to do here is instantiate the pause menu prefab if no instance of it currently exists. So I'm going to call instantiate, which is a default method to all MonoBehaviours, on the pause menu prefab. And we want to put this on the canvas. So if a canvas doesn't exist, then we want to create that canvas. And if it does exist, then we want to put this onto the canvas. So one way we can do this is also get a public, or actually probably a private canvas. We don't really want anyone setting this manually in the inspector. And I will call this canvas. So this canvas, that's what we want to use as the transform location for this method. So what we're doing here is we're creating a copy of the game object prefab on top of the canvas transform. And when you attach a child to a parent, that means in the hierarchy, it's going to be one level below it. So by doing this, the game object will be created on the canvas and it will draw on the screen properly. So you should do that for UI elements. But we should only be doing this if one does not already exist. So if pause menu instance is equal to null, then we should do that. Otherwise, we should simply tell the current pause menu instance to be set active to true. So set, well, it's not going to show the method until we actually define it. So game object pause menu instance. Okay, so now we should be able to call the dot set active and set that to true. So this game code is first checking to see if one exists, and if it doesn't, then it creates a new game menu. And if it does exist, then set currently existing pause menu to true. But we still need to do one thing for this simple script to work, which is to do a onAwake method for the MonoBehaviour, and we need to find the canvas inside of the scene. So the canvas is going to be get component in the scene canvas. So if one already exists, then that gets assigned here. If not, then we actually want it to create one. But you know what? I just thought of an even better way to do it. We can do this as a property. So to declare it as a property, we're going to want to define this again. So I'll call this scene canvas so that the name doesn't override. So I'm going to call this scene canvas so that its name doesn't conflict with the class name. And we need to do a get and a set. Oh, actually, really we just need get, because we're not really trying to create new canvases. So what we'll do is, if the current canvas is equal to null, then we will make canvas equals get component canvas. So basically, if it hasn't been set yet, then we're going to set it with the scene. And if it's still not active, then we're going to need to create a new canvas element. So we can do that, I suppose, with instantiate. So I'm going to instantiate a new canvas, and the transform is not going to be set because we don't want to parent it with anything. We're just going to create a new canvas UI component. And then after all of that's done, we want to return the canvas. And one more thing is to make sure that the canvas variable is actually set there. So this is going to check if canvas variable is set. Then if not set, look in scene for canvas. And then finally, if no canvas in scene, create one. Then finally, we're going to return the canvas. So with this, I guess we don't need this awake method anymore, at least for the moment. And we'll be able to have a canvas basically no matter what. So even if we forget to include a canvas in the scene, it's going to create one for us on demand. And then through open pause menu, if we need that canvas on demand, all we need to do is call scene canvas as a property here. So it's going to go through all this code before returning the final canvas. And then it'll give us the transform for that canvas and instantiate the prefab onto that. So this is just a kind of more fun, cool way of doing pretty much what we would have done in onAwake, which is just to get the canvas in the scene. But it goes one step further and creates the canvas if one does not exist. Okay, so now we need to attach this cool game manager script to an object in our scene. So one place we could put it, assuming you're using the event systems that are basically defaulted into every scene, we could just attach it to that game object, and it would work pretty much okay. So next, I'm going to drag this pause menu we created, the prefab, into the game scene manager. So now this game scene manager has the method for opening the pause menu, or instantiating and opening it, but it does not actually have anything referencing that script in order to call that method. So there's a few ways we could do it now. One is just to check if the escape button is pressed, and if so, open the pause menu, which is probably what we're going to do for starters. Another way is that you can have an event trigger in your game, like you go up to a save point, you hit enter, it checks if there's a trigger collision with that save point, and then if there is, then you open up a menu. Basically, you reference the game scene manager and then call pause menu open. So getting that event in game method to work is a little bit more involved, so that'll be a different mini video series. But for right now, we can make it really easy on us by just having it trigger when the escape button is pressed. So a generally better practice would be to separate the import script or import manager from something like a game scene manager. But what I'll do just here for this video is I'm going to make an update method. So we'll just kind of include that basic functionality for this game scene manager in here. But it's up to you if you want to separate it later on into separate scripts and make everything, and to decouple everything from different systems. So we can do public void update, which exists in all MonoBehaviours. And what we would do is if input.getKeyDown is equal to the key code.escape key, then we know that import key is down. And now we can call the open pause menu function. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually test this out to see if it works. Okay, so we're in game, stuff's happening, I'm gonna hit escape, and what happens? We get a null reference exception. Okay, so I'm going to check that error and see where it was. I'm guessing it was related to the canvas. Okay, so to correct a couple things in the scene, where it says get component canvas, this is actually checking on the current game object, which in this case is the event system. So there was a canvas in the scene, but it wasn't able to find it. So the method we're actually trying to call is find object of type canvas. So if it finds a canvas object in the scene, it will assign it there. Now for this instantiate, you can't instantiate a new game object as a component there. So another way we could do this, and I think this is probably the better way, would be to do a prefab as well. Rather than manually creating a new game object with something like gameObject.instantiate and then adding components like the canvas to it manually, why not just have it all saved as a prefab with all of the settings we want inside of our assets folder, just like with the pause menu. So for that, I will do public game object canvas prefab, And instead, we'll just simply be creating a copy of that canvas prefab. And then we'll get component canvas on top of it, because the variable canvas is storing a reference to the component, not the game object. So the components are what's attached to the game object. So now we can take this canvas, make it into a prefab by dragging it down below once Unity updates here. So I'm going to create that prefab down here in my prefabs folder. And to prove that everything works, I'm going to delete that canvas as well. And I'm going to set it as a prefab that's attached to this game scene manager script. So now if we hit play, we can test if the canvas and the pause menu will be created on demand. So I'm going to hit escape, and oh, look at that. So we have canvas clone and pause menu clone created here. As you can see, the pause menu is attached to the clone, and we have all of the buttons, the text, and the close menu button up here exactly as we created it in the prefab. So using prefabs, you can accomplish a lot, especially if you need to duplicate enemies or things of that nature. Prefabs become very, very useful. Now, I'm back out of the game runtime, and we're just working in the hierarchy again. So we still have to do a few things here. We have a pause menu that can open, but none of its buttons actually do anything at the moment. So we need to create a script for the pause menu and probably attach it as a MonoBehaviour on the pause menu itself. So let's go to scripts, and I'm going to create a new script, and we will call it pause menu. So this time, I'm not going to be keeping a reference to the buttons inside of the script, but rather the buttons are going to reference the script inside of the inspector, where you can set on click delegates straight in the inspector, which is great for designers. You don't have to worry about code. So we just need to create the methods, which this pause menu is capable of doing. So let's start with a close menu button. And this is going to take the game object and set active and false. Now, another alternative, if you want to destroy the prefab so it's not in your scene when it's not being active, then another thing you could do as an alternative is destroy this .gameObject. Okay, so when you say this, you're referencing the script, but you actually want to reference the game object that it's attached to. So we're going to be attaching the pause menu script to the pause menu game object, but we don't want to destroy the script, because then the rest of the pause menu, everything but the script functionality, is still going to be there. That's why you need to call this .game object, not this. Pretty common mistake there. So next up, we'll do open save menu. And just for fun, because we're doing it the prefab method, we could put in a public game object save menu prefab here, and then we'll create that, and it's the exact same thing as the game scene manager. We just want to open that save menu, so I'm gonna run this over here. So the next thing that we would need to be able to do is to create an open save menu function, so that the button inside of the pause menu can call that. So as things are here, we could rewrite it. Basically, the open pause menu function, we rewrite the same thing here, and we could also rewrite the same code where we get reference to the canvas, just like in the game scene manager. But we don't actually want to have to rewrite code over and over again, and it'll make things messy anyway. Now, because the pause menu is not actually going to be inside of the scene when the scene loads, it's instantiated from a prefab, or the save menu as well. We can't actually reference that script at the moment by doing something like game scene manager, because it doesn't exist when we're working with the prefab. Prefab only has knowledge of the components that are under it. Now, we also can't just simply make the game scene manager a static class like this, because it inherits from MonoBehaviour. So what we actually want to do here is to turn the game scene manager into a singleton, and when it's a singleton, it'll be able to be referenced statically from other scripts like this. So we'd be able to call something like game scene manager dot whatever method we have in there, but you can see those methods, they need to be static, or we need to have reference to the actual game manager instance. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about a really cool library called Singleton, and we'll actually be turning this game scene manager from a MonoBehaviour into a singleton instance, which still has MonoBehaviour functionality, basically. And And it actually goes a step further than that, because we'll be able to create this game scene manager as a file that exists inside of our assets folder. So the game scene manager will become something that always exists. There'll always be one copy of it, and we can reference it from other scripts like this pause menu, even if the pause menu is not going to exist when the game starts, but rather be instantiated as a prefab. And what you might notice is that going this direction with singleton systems that exist one of in your system is actually a bit more similar to what Unity is coming out in the future, which is the Unity ECS, or Entity Component System. Now for now we'll be using singletons. ECS is nowhere near ready for the public yet, and this should serve as a cool way to get these global scripts running that we can use inside of our other game objects, our UI components, and basically be able to reference their functionality on demand. And be sure that it always actually exists one copy of inside of our scene. So anyway, that's going to be the next video. For now, that's going to be it. So I've been Chris, thanks for watching, and I'll see you when we continue working on these pause menu scripts inside of Unity.